Let's get the microphone to work. That's much better. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's committee meeting. My name is Councillor Jeff Bray. I am the Vice Chairman of the Planning Committee here, and in the absence of the Chairman tonight, I will be chairing the meeting. To my left directly is my Vice Chairman for the evening, Councillor McWilliams. Also along this top table are various officers of Council, including the Head of Planning and our Legal Officer, Ms Hastings. The people you can see either side of me are the councillors who make up the committee. It is they who will be debating, discussing and ultimately deciding on the applications before us this evening. Can I remind you all, please, that this is a quasi-judicial committee. As such, it's extremely important that the councillors are able to hear each other during debates, and therefore I would ask you please to keep noise to a minimum within the public gallery. That in mind, can I also ask you please to switch off or to silent your mobile phones? And I hope we've all remembered to do that. I think we have. Excellent. Lastly, this meeting this evening, as with all planning meetings, will be recorded. So that is the reason we are using microphones. Can I remind members please to switch on your microphones when speaking at any point to ensure that you are recorded. That recording will be available in 5 or 6 days on the Council's website for anybody who wishes to listen back to it. Okay, that done, I think we can get on. It completes the introduction. So if we can go through then, can I start please with item 1, apologies for absence and substitutions, please, Charlotte.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor White with no substitutes.
Thank you, Charlotte. Excellent. Good. Okay, item 2, minutes of the last meeting, pages 1 to 6 in your agenda. Hopefully everybody's had the chance to check through the minutes, make sure they're okay. Any observations or comments? Can I please sign those minutes as a true and accurate set of minutes? Agreed? Thank you. Which I will now do. Perfect. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest, please? I see no hands, so I'm assuming that's a no. Excellent. Thank you. Bear with me. Item 4. Questions, notice, nothing there? Yeah. Okay. Item 4 then, questions on notice. Pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 33, there are none this evening. Excellent. Good, we're making good progress. So we'll move then to item 5 very quickly. Item 5, land to the south of Thorpe Road, Wheeley, the land close by, that is A1 in the agenda. That item has been withdrawn from this meeting and will now be heard on the 12th of August at the Town Hall Princess Theatre. That decision was made by myself in conjunction with senior officers and related to the expected number of members of the public which we felt could represent a health and safety issue in this building, and therefore it was necessary to move it to a building that could cope. So that application has been moved to the 12th of August at Town Hall. Okay. Item 6, A2, planning application 18/01728 detail, 171 Thorpe Road, land to the rear of 121 to 183 Thorpe Road and 4 to 20 Chapel Lane, KIrby Cross, Frinton-On-Sea, and you will find this on pages 55 to 84 in your agenda. Alison, is this yours? Yeah. Alison, the floor is yours.
You'll see that we've had an amended plan, the master plan, which has just resulted in a change to the approved plans condition for that revision number. That's to alter the footpath link between the edge of the site and Chapel Lane. I'll show you some photos of that area shortly. So that results in a slight change to conditions 2 and 6 for further details of that, because it's just indicated at the moment. So the application is referred to committee at the request of members when determining the outline planning permission. The outline planning permission was allowed at appeal for up to 110 dwellings and included the means of access to the site, which is 1 vehicular access onto Thorpe Road, 2 pedestrian accesses and a 3rd pedestrian access onto Chapel Lane. That followed committee refusal, which was against the local green gap policy, out of character and harmful to the countryside. The outline planning permission contains 19 conditions and a section 106 for 8 gifted affordable units, on-site open space and education and healthcare contributions, with the figures detailed at page 76. So the application before you is for 105 dwellings, and we're considering appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. So access has already been approved at outline. This is the application site. So access has been approved here following the demolition of this dwelling, and there's another dwelling here to be demolished, and then the 3 pedestrian accesses are here. So the application's been subject to amendments as detailed within the report, and following evidence of barn owls, a barn owl survey was submitted and independently assessed by Essex County Council Ecology. You'll see that detailed in the report with additional conditions. So the barn owl structure is still on the site. There's evidence that they've been breeding in that barn, so the conditions will secure a new barn owl nest feature in this far corner, which has to be in place 1 year before they demolish the building that they're currently in. And there'll be monitoring of that as well to see how much it's used, whether there's breeding in there. And there's another condition that there will be a fence to restrict access 75 metres back, so the public won't have access to this area so that they don't disturb the barn owls. As the attenuation lake is down in this little dog leg of the site as well, but the main open space area is in the middle. You'll also have seen reference to the level crossing. This is the Chapel Lane pedestrian link through onto Chapel Lane, which is a private road, and the existing railway crossing is here. Network Rail didn't object to the outline planning permission, but they've registered an objection to this application. They state if the publicised dog walking route were to be altered to avoid the railway crossing, they'd be satisfied, and I'll address that a bit later in the presentation. These are some photos from the time of the outline application, because the site is overgrown at the moment. I thought it was more helpful to show it in its previous paddock use. These are recent photos of the property to be demolished to give the vehicular access, and this is standing at the back boundary of that property looking over the site. This is from a rear boundary of property on Thorpe Road. You can see the new bungalows that have been built up in the top corner of the site, and then looking back along this Thorpe Road rear garden boundary. This is from the gate at Chapel Lane, where you will have stopped off on the committee site visit bus. This is looking down to the railway line boundary, across the site to the far side. See, it's very flat, and then looking back up towards Thorpe Road. And this is Chapel Lane, where we've had the recent amended plans. It's this stretch where there'll be a narrower footpath with landscaping to either side and bollards at the end, because this property has a right of access across the front. The bollards will be up in this location here. This is the railway crossing as spoken about. And this is the site master plan. So the amendment to the plans is in this location here, which just shows the extra area of landscaping. So the proposal is for 105 dwellings. They're mainly bungalows. And the means of access is onto Thorpe Road here, as approved at outline, with the pedestrian accesses. And then this is the attenuation area where the barn owl nest box will be. So there won't be public access to this section. But this is the area of public open space where the 106 requires a local area of play in the middle. This shows you the existing protected trees on the site. You've got some in the back, right against the back gardens of those new bungalows, which I showed you the photo of, and you've got the stretch down the middle here. Shows you the parking plans. There's a shortfall of 1 visitor parking space, but 3 of the plots each have an extra space, so that's considered to be acceptable. This is the tenure plan. So there's 8 gifted affordable units. You've got 2 4-bed houses here, 2 2-bed bungalows here, and then 4 2-bed flats up here. So they're scattered about the site, and the design is in keeping with the other properties. You've got a good variety. This is the highways plan, showing you the main highway access with the footpaths to both sides, and then some shared surfaces further into the site, and again the footpath links. These are one of the apartment blocks up at the north of the site. This is the affordable block with 4 2-bed flats, and that's the 3rd apartment block. And this shows you the house types across the site. So as you can see, this is the affordable houses and this is the affordable bungalows, but you can't pick them out across the development. And they're mainly bungalows, as stated. That just shows you in the street scene that you've got mainly bungalows. These are the flats, which are 1.5 stories. And then this shows you so these are the affordable 2-storey at the edge as you go through to Chapel Lane here. So the plans have been subject to quite a few amendments to overcome initial concerns in regards to neighbour impact and the detailed design. Officers are now happy with that. They comply with the private amenity space standards, and there wouldn't be any harm to any of the existing occupiers. So the applicant provided this circular walking route. So the application site is here, the Chapel Lane cut through is here. So the walking route would encourage residents of the site to come down to walk the public footpath route with 2 railway crossings and then to loop back round. This is under the Natural England requirements for the SANGs, so that it's reducing the pressure on the designated European sites. The applicant's now provided 2 additional routes. This route provides a second railway crossing further away from the station. The station's over here. And then the third route avoids the railway crossings entirely. So following Network Rail's concerns, those 2 alternative walking routes have been provided. One avoids the railway entirely. A conditions also included requiring that the travel information packs include information on the risks of crossing the railway line and how to use the crossing safely. Anglian Water have confirmed there's no longer sufficient capacity for foul water from the development, so a condition is imposed to agree the foul water drainage from the development. That's changed since the outline. And the unilateral undertaking for RAMS was sent out yesterday for signature, so the application is recommended for approval as per those amended conditions on the update sheet and subject to receipt of the UU. Thank you. Thank you.
In my haste to check for declarations of interest, I neglected my own. I wish to declare a declaration of interest as a member of Frinton and Walton Town Council. However, I wasn't present when that council discussed this application, and I am neither predetermined nor predisposed. Thank you. Okay, on to public speaking. I have one speaker listed here, a member of the public, Mr. Peter Hart. Is Mr. Peter Hart with us? Thank you. Okay, Peter, I'm not sure if you've done this before, but if you'd like to get yourself nice and comfortable and press a little button on the microphone, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you, sir.
All right, sorry. Mr Vice Chairman, committee members, officers. I live in a listed building, Mill House, 127 Thorpe Road, KIrby Cross. Obviously, no one wants large developments on their doorstep, but this is now termed as progress, and the government needs to significantly increase housing supply. Unfortunately, because TDC didn't have a local plan, they were restricted, or it was difficult for them to turn down large developments or get them through the inspector. So this is where we are. I accept that the principle has been established through the outline application that went to and was passed at appeal, I think September 2016. So, you know, from what you've said, I'm not sure whether we have much of an argument with all the conditions that have been laid out and obviously are now getting signed off, or will be getting signed off, because it's going to go ahead, but it's just all about detail. I do have significant concerns around the access road, because I'm sure the highway said that is still a little bit dangerous. I'm not sure how they changed that. Also, obviously, the drainage, the foul water, and the traffic increase, which no one seems to highlight. And obviously, it's getting worse and worse with all the other developments going on. Protection of wildlife, no, that's great, but it has developed a lot in the last 3 or 4 years over there. And you've got roebuck deers, lots of bats, everything else. They're probably not the only owls there either. They're right at the back of us. So, you know, hopefully that'll be looked at in more detail. So, you know, that's the main concerns of the local, you know, ourselves and the local residents in the area. But as I say, I understand it's been addressed by various conditions highlighted in the committee report. I do have one concern now that we've just heard about the access at Chapel Lane being reduced, because I thought that was also being used as another emergency access for ambulances or whatever. So if there's a problem at this access, you can't get anything onto the site. But, don't know. So what I can cover as a personal issue is our Grade 2 listed building has been assessed under the impact on heritage assets section of the committee report. However, the report only identifies a heritage statement supplied by the developer. I've looked on several other TDC applications and the heritage officer has been consulted and then comments are available to view online. This doesn't appear to have happened in this case, unless I've missed it. This is especially relevant to the proposed new footpath, which is directly adjacent to the side flank wall of Mill House and the impact it may have on the setting of the listed building. Although the report states that the setting has already been eroded by neighbouring properties, what evidence has been provided to determine the impact the proposed new footpath will have? The proposed new footpath area has been overgrown for 2.5 to 3 years. Therefore, it is considered fair to say that this assessment may not have been carried out, or if it had, not to the level that I would have expected of a professionally qualified heritage officer.
Mr Hart, can I ask you to wind up now? Thank you.
Oh, sorry, right, okay. I would like to ask the committee members how they are going to protect this heritage asset during and after completion of this development. By accepting this proposal, this could set a precedent for other developers who wish to build in close proximity to other listed buildings. I've also looked at the fencing plan, and for some reason there appears to be a gap in the fencing at the bottom of our garden, plus no fencing indicated at either side of the proposed new footpath, leaving properties either side vulnerable. Hopefully this can be rectified through consultation with the developer. Last sentence, I would hope that the developer will be working with the affected residents to ensure a smooth and satisfactory conclusion to this development.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hart. Alison, is there anything you'd like to come back on there?
If I could just come back on a few of those points. So, yes, the site is overgrown, but there's a condition for ecological surveys on the outline permission before development commences. It was just the specific issue of the barn owls that we were clear that there seemed to be nesting on the site, so we wanted to address that at an early stage. Emergency access, there is no requirement under the outline permission that this was for emergency access, and it's not a requirement from highways, so it's fine for that to be pedestrian. The listed building Mill House is here, directly adjacent to the footpath. It appears that that has always been a footpath, is fenced off and is very overgrown, but that was considered under the outline permission, where the inspector refers to the proposed footpath to Thorpe Road, would pass Mill House, which is listed at Grade 2. The illustrative layout indicates new dwellings would be sufficiently separated from the listed building to avoid any harm to its setting. Although these matters are not for consideration, I'm satisfied an acceptable layout could be achieved in this respect. He goes on to mention about how lighting is controlled by condition, so we can ensure there wouldn't be light pollution. Again, fencing is controlled by condition. So you've got the new bungalows, the roofs of that you saw in my photos are right here, and you've got bungalow proposed at the end of this rear garden as well. I don't know if it's clearer to see on the photo. You can see that the listed building has got a large treed garden which the inspector refers to, so the bungalow would be in this location, so we're satisfied that there wouldn't be any harm to its setting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, observations, comments? Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to answer, if I may, with reference to two issues which I have highlighted as network rail.
Sorry, Maurice, can you put your mic on? Thank you. It is, yeah, bless.
Apologise, I'll start again. I have two issues which I wish to raise. Is network rails do not object to the development, however, they do object to a direct footpath link. I'm concerned about cutting into a public footway like that and whether or not that's within our scope, but I believe that this bollard has now satisfied that criteria. Could we answer that first, please, Alison?
Alison?
We haven't reconsulted Network Rail. They say that if the circular dog walking route that is in this direction is removed from the proposals, that they would be satisfied. They don't refer to the existence of this route here. It's the promotion of a circular dog walking route in this location. But as this is already a public right of way, obviously any member of the public is entitled to cross it. At the moment, it's a crossing point from Network Rail. So again, they are entitled to close that if they have public safety issues. It's not something that was raised at the outline permission when the pedestrian access in this location was granted. It's a newer consideration through Natural England's requirements for people to keep their recreation within the surrounds of the site. So that's why we've now got the 3 alternative dog walking routes. So this is the original route that comes straight out of the site and over the railway crossing, around the public footpath network and over the other railway crossing here, and then back up. This second one, again, crosses at the same point but takes an alternative railway crossing over here, and the third avoids the railway completely and comes up to the north with a big, I think it was 4.5 kilometre walking route. So it's our recommendation that that's included as a condition to go into the residential packs in order to reduce the impact on the designated European sites in accordance with Natural England's recommendations. And as they're already public rights of way, we don't see that we could hold an objection on those grounds.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. The thing that's concerning me about this is that we talk about the public right of way, and in fact, I believe that it is fully established as that. And you are right that you can't stop people using a public right of way. But what the thing is bothering me is the fact is that what they're cutting into is not. This has been put there by the developers, to which I've got no objections whatsoever against at all, really. But the fact is, a safety factor is that to cross the railway lines, and you're now aiming for a different type of maybe resident to settle there, nuclear families with children, that what separates the railway line is merely a stile, which you cross, and I believe there's an area underneath for the doggies to walk underneath. This seems a great temptation to me, and I can see concerns that have been raised by residents that there's an element of danger there, that they'll be so close to that railway line, where on the actual development site itself, a pin to the railway line, there is going to be a fencing and a protection against them, where across there's no protection. I don't quite understand why that was put there, as it serves no purpose for an emergency appliance or anything of that ilk. I'm just concerned by that.
So as I say, the accesses were approved at outline, so the inspector approved the vehicular access and these 3 pedestrian points of access to the site. And as you will have seen, that's already a gated access, so it already exists, but it's the difference in the matter of whether you're promoting a crossing over the railway to mitigate the ecological impact. But the pedestrian link is already there and has already been approved under the outline. It can't be taken away through the reserved matters.
Thanks, Alison. Councillor Harris.
Thank you.
You've gone off again.
No, we're on. That's it.
Okay, Mike's misbehaving.
Yeah, a bit of information really to stick with the level crossings there. Obviously, with this development, Network Rail have decided not to make any sort of serious alterations, i.e., put a footbridge. Now we have seen potentially at other applications with other sites where they've made the decision to put a rather large footbridge over. What is the criteria in terms of what determines whether or not there is a level crossing or a footbridge? And I'm thinking of a site which is not too far away from here, where there's a monstrosity of a footbridge that's going to be being planned, and it's a similar situation where there's a relatively large development going in there. I'll be very interested to find out the reason, please. Thank you.
Alison, would you like to come back to that?
She's busy looking at.
Sorry.
So Network Rail's comments are on page 63. So they say removal of the direct footpath would make the development more acceptable to Network Rail, or the developer could provide a footbridge to allow Nursey level crossing to close. I mean, that's something that, if that was an issue, that would have needed to be picked up at outline stage. I'm aware of a site in Great Bentley where that was picked up. I don't know the difference in the crossings and the safety levels, but that would be for Network Rail to confirm.
Do you want to say?
In a minute. Okay. Peter wants to come back.
Yeah, come back, Peter. Yep, by all means.
Okay, so to pick up Morris's point, there's going to be families moving in there with children. There's going to be a different type of there's no residents there at all at the moment on that site there, so there's going to be a lot more children. So, there is a concern about the safety aspect there. But again, I'm still not clear why Network Rail haven't insisted on a footbridge here. If they're saying it's perfectly safe with a level crossing, that's I'm somewhat sort of confused as to where the risk is. At what level was the tipping point as to when they decide that there must be a bridge there? Does it go on the size of the development, or is it or is it a question that we can ask Network Rail? It's a safety-related issue, really. Thank you.
I'll pass to Lisa. Ms Hastings, perhaps you could help us out here.
Thank you, Chairman. As Alison has pointed out, that whether a footbridge would have been required for public safety reasons for the number of dwellings would have been picked up at outline stage. That's the time when that issue would have been raised, or should have been raised. It's not relevant in relation to reserved matters. So I think we can't really go much further with that point on this application before you now.
Any other comments? Councillor Alexandra.
I'd like to, if I may, Chair, is to talk about the barn owls and the future of their habitat and their foraging area, and the information that I have taken this from is from the Barn Owl Trust, working with the Planning Authority from the National Planning Policy. Right, what I'd like to bring, if I may, Chair, where there is no evidence of any owl nesting within a specified time, there is no need for making any temporary or indeed for imposing any restrictions between March and August. But I can see quite clearly that the developers have identified that there is a need, because the ecological report says that there is evidence there. There are one or two things that inside of this report that concerns me, and which I'd like to bring up now, if I may. Within it, if it's been seen that an owl hasn't nested there within the last 2 years, and that's been identified, yes, there's evidence of that, then it requires an immediate pre-development survey. Yes, it must be given an immediate development survey, and imposing timings between March to August for that nesting period, although Tytos, unlike cousins, will breed outside of that, but that's considered to be the registered time. And entering into a space, you have said 75 metres as a parameter around what's there. Now, what's there apparently is a large metal barn, obviously a very ancient barn there from the sound of it, and they have made their house and home in there, and the new nesting boxes, which are built to the spec, I assume that's laid down in the planning proposals, that they will match that, and that we will be able to see as the development's going on, because the difficulty I have is that it clearly states in here that this should be overseen by a registered individual with such professional qualifications as to be able to monitor that. And that falls under the umbrella of the local authority, and I have that here as well. You can have those, incidentally, for your perusal. Could you give us assurance that the developers have taken into consideration that they will need to go on and recheck to make sure that these owls are doing what they're supposed to do and move into their new house, and then the demolition of the actual building that's in situ at the moment falls within that 1 year period, and that this will be monitored by a registered professional practitioner who specialises within the ecosystem of our country. Okay. Oh, that's you.
Sorry.
Thanks. So if you look at conditions 3 and 4, those have been imposed as recommended by Essex County Council ecologists. So they've looked at the ecology report on our behalf, and they're satisfied with the mitigation that's proposed, and they're satisfied with the qualifications of the person that carried out that initial barn owl survey. So that details that they have to come to us as the District Council to approve these details, but then we would consult Essex County Council by ecology specialists to make sure that what they're proposing is satisfactory. So they have to put up the new barn owl nest box 1 year before they can demolish the shed that they're in at the moment, to give them a chance to naturally move over. And then they also have to agree monitoring by suitable professionals so that they can monitor the use of the new nest box. So that would all be controlled by us via Essex County.
By all means.
The reason I'm returning is because afternoon there seemed to be some confusion as to who would be responsible for the actual overseeing of this. Now, this is a particular bent of mine. I know that the trees, which are beautiful things, have all TPO'd, so there's no problem there. And the developers seem to have gone out of their way to match everything that needed to be done. I'm just a little bit concerned that we're getting all the dots on top of the I's and we're crossing all the T's to ensure these creatures are becoming rarer and rarer as their foraging ground is becoming eaten up by such developments such as this, which we need as human beings, but we need to be sympathetic with nature in itself. That's the only way that we're going to do this. As long as you're happy in your own mind that this will be carried out, I'm more than happy when you're looking forward to propose this as laid out in the conditions and the agenda.
Okay, so Councillor Harris. Morris, could you switch off your mic?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'm referring to the report on page 63, Anglian Water Services, where it talks about foul drainage, and it talks about that the catchment area is Waddesdon at the recycling centre there, and it says it recommends that a condition is recommended to ensure that the sewerage network has capacity to accept the flows. So I wondered whether you had any comment on that, and to clarify whether the recommended network has the capacity. And it also then goes on to talk about surface water. Anglian Water do not consider that evidence so far has been provided to show that surface water hierarchy has been followed as stipulated in Building Regulations Part H. Could we confirm that there are going to be no issues with sewerage or surface water? Otherwise, we could all end up in the with a problem. Thank you.
Alison?
Thank you. So Anglian Water, in terms of foul drainage, they commented on the outline permission and said they had sufficient catchment, sufficient capacity. So we didn't impose a condition at that time. That's since changed, and they now don't have sufficient capacity. So we've put a condition on the reserved matters requiring approval of the foul drainage. So that will address that issue, and we'll consult with Anglian Water on the scheme that they submit. Surface water drainage, Anglian Water don't comment directly, so they've commented there, but it's then Essex County Council are the lead local flood authority. So they've commented. Initially, I think they objected on this application, but then we went back and confirmed that we've got the conditions on the outline permission, so they've removed that objection because we've got the 3 detailed conditions on the outline permission. So they have to send all those details before they can start works to make sure that the surface water drainage is acceptable. So it's all covered by either the conditions on the outline for the surface water and the proposed conditions for the foul drainage on this new application.
Thank you. Councillor Harris?
So we can reassure the committee and residents that there are going to be no issues with surface water or foul drainage with this new proposed development.
Yes, that's right. It's all covered by condition.
Thank you. Any further comments or observations? Councillor Harris.
From the site visit today, just a couple of observations. I noted that there were power lines, overhead power lines, and I can't see any evidence of what's going to happen to them, but can you just confirm that they are going underground? And also, along the railway, obviously there's stipulation, I believe, in the report that the houses have got to have triple glazing. There is some form of fence going to go between the housing and the railway. And could you tell me, is that just standard fencing or is it acoustic fencing? Thank you.
So this shows you the overhead lines in the site. I can't get back to it quick enough, but this is open space, so it crosses the open space. There isn't any details of whether they would be put under the ground. There's no requirement for them to do that. It would be hoped that they would, but it crosses the open space area, so it's... I can find your plan. So they come up here, you've got a substation there, and then they cross across this direction. The noise, yes, you've got the railway line at the bottom. The inspector imposed a condition, I think it was condition 16, that requires details of noise mitigation to be submitted because of the impact on those residents along the railway line from noise from the railway. It was specifically that issue. One of the fencing plans shows acoustic fencing along there, but we're not approving it at this stage. It doesn't form part of the approved plans condition, so that will be part of a discharge of condition where we would get the details of the acoustic fencing backed up by their noise assessment.
Councillor Harris.
Okay, thanks. Reference to the fencing. The overhead power lines. Sorry, can we just go? Oh, hang on. Where have we gone? where were we standing today? Which parts? We were there. Yeah. Well, the overhead lines went straight across the other way. I don't think it went diagonally like that.
I agree. No, I agree.
It went straight across at the back along the tree line. That's where it went. And also, I mean, if that drawing's correct, then it's going across the open land. So we're taking overhead power lines across the children's play area? Surely not.
Fair point.
But I'm sure that the power lines went across. I don't know if the other members of the committee agree. That they went along that tree line.
On that tree line. Yeah. I agree.
The messy angle that we were at.
Give us a moment.
No, would you?
No, I agree.
It did look as though it was just straight across.
That's the way I saw it, yeah. I have to be honest, when I looked at it, I agree with Councillor Harris that the lines did appear to go in a straight line. It may have been an optical illusion, but I don't think so. It's diagonal, it's definitely diagonal.
Yeah, Kath zoomed it in on this aerial image, and there's a post here, and then as it shows on the other plan, a post there.
Okay.
Which you can see in this final plan.
See that, can we?
It must have been the angle we were standing at.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, but the question I believe you posed a moment ago still stands. I mean, to follow up on that, are these going underground? Do we know what happens? Can we condition it that they do go underground? Is there anything we can do about that?
It's not a planning requirement to do that. It's obviously an expense to the applicant.
It's outside of our remit.
Yeah, so they would have to get consent from the power provider to do that, and it would have to be in accordance with their guidelines.
Okay, Councillor Harris.
Okay, I mean, I hadn't been drinking at that time of the morning when we actually looked at it, but I'd be amazed if it was diagonal. But I take your point of view, your word for it, that it is, but it didn't look like that. But it's actually given me a greater issue now that these lines are going over the play area, and my children. I mean, if they, getting footballs and they're kicking them up in the air. I mean, surely that has got to be a safety issue. Must be, surely. I have real concerns about that. And it must be some sort of mistake, unless I'm missing the glaringly obvious here.
think I share your concerns, Councillor Harris. I think officers have indicated it's not something we have any control over. Is that correct? Can we clarify? Bear with me.
Just give
If you say it's not within our control, and they have permitted development rights to move the lines. If the power companies want to move their lines, they just notify us as a matter of courtesy. But it's within their permitted development rights. It doesn't need planning permission.
Okay. Councillor Harris.
Well, I am deeply concerned, and I am sure the local residents will be deeply concerned as well, because it could be their children that are playing there. I mean, is there any way that this matter can be deferred until we get clarification as what is actually going to happen with those power lines? Because it is of real concern, and you know, I would be very, very unhappy with approving this.
I think, that's a reasonable point. The issue with the power lines, is that an issue with the power lines for yourself, Councillor Harris, or is it an issue with the fact that power lines now go over a play area? Because obviously if we don't have control over the power lines, we may have some control over the play area. So just looking for ways around that.
Well, a couple of things really. I mean, one, I've still got to go back there to satisfy myself that they're going diagonally across there. So I've got to see it to believe it. But I'm assuming that's the case. But yeah, whatever happens, yeah, we've either got to say that play area is moved, or the power lines are moved, in my opinion. But I would defer matters until a decision has been made. I would bat it back really, and I'd be very uncomfortable as it is.
Following on from that, can I ask officers for an opinion on that with regard to potentially referring to find out what they're going to do with, or deferring to find out what they're going to do with that, or what else we could do? What are our options? Can we do that?
So we could consult the power provider on the application and see what their guidelines are for safety, if they would raise any concerns, and report that back to committee.
Okay. And
Can we defer it then?
so we should defer until you do that?
If that's what members want to do.
Well, let's see what members want to do. So, members, is that what you want to do? Then we need a mover and a seconder, please. Okay, Councillor Harris moves to defer the application pending information from the power company. That's seconded by Councillor Tracy. So we have a motion to defer pending information from the power company. Sorry, Cathy, you want to come back?
Chairman, just before you vote, just to clarify, that's the single issue, single reason for deferring. There are no other issues that you're wanting officers to explore.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Kath. Whilst we're deferring, is there anything else that anybody wants looked into whilst we're doing that? Is there any other issue, or are we just dealing with the single issue? Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chair. Can I talk about to the deferment rather than any other issue? Because at the moment, I think my other issues are on the back burner and being well looked after. Although I see where you're coming from, Councillor Harris is quite right in what he's been saying. These power lines are in an open field that has been there for many, many generations. Yep. They're obviously feeding something.
Absolutely.
So they're there for a reason, and I don't think it's to be keeping the owl's nest warm in the winter. From the looks of them, they look like standard overhead lines carrying in whatever voltage standard overhead lines carry in. Yep. I think a more plausible solution to this problem would be to ask the officers, as you rightfully said, Alison, is to ask the developers about them and to ask what the long term, where do they go, what's the point of them being there, blah, 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 and then report to us. I think I much prefer that, because that means that we can move this application on, and I think that might be the right way forward. I don't think just asking that as a deferment is, in my mind, quite enough for a development of this size.
Can I clarify what you're asking for, Councillor Alexander? Are you saying yes to deferral or not yes to deferral. I'm sorry, I'm not clear there. It might be me.
What I'm trying to say is that I'm asking the officer, or the officer has said that they were willing to ask the developers that what is going to happen with that,
Yep.
and if that satisfies the motion and the seconder to that motion, then I would happily go along with that, because I believe that we're right at the point where a decision is going to be made, because
Yep.
not once have we mentioned the actual development itself,
Yes.
but the peripherals around it. We've only been talking to it on that, not about the buildings or anything
Yep.
like that. And the officers have brought it to us in this fruition. I think what we should be doing is putting our trust in them and allowing them to answer this before we make a final decision, because we can pick that up at a later date.
Okay, so fine, thank you. As I understand it, did officers need to come back to that? No. Okay, as I understand it, we have a motion for deferral with a seconder, so we'll need to take a vote on that. So the motion is that we defer the application whilst we get information relating to power lines and where they're going. Those in favour of that motion, please. And those opposed? 4, 2, and I will abstain, so that gives us 4-2. That motion is carried, so we will defer. Thank you. Thank you. That application then is deferred while we get the information we require relating to the power line. Thank you, everybody. Okay. Thanks, Alison. We move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is item 7A3, planning application 18-014344, Maplin Court, Kings Avenue, Holland. I have speakers on this particular issue, but I think we'll let the officer do their thing first. Graham.
Chairman, thank you. Yes, this is an application for the erection of an additional floor to an existing block of residential flats. It's the addition of 4 new one-bed units at what's known as Maplin Court at Kings Avenue, Holland-on-Sea. So this is the application site itself. You'll have noted the site and the locality on your site visits this morning. So that's the actual building itself. There's a large area of parking space to the rear of the site with access at this point from Kings Avenue. You'll have noted within the immediate area there are a number of other similar flatter developments, particularly along Kings Parade and off Madeira Road as well. So that's the overhead, just looking at the wider area. So that's the front of the existing building. There's a better picture of it. You'll note the use of materials at the moment. You have a render infill at ground floor level, brick at first floor, and then a flat roof finish to it. That's just the end of the building. That's Madeira Road at that point. That's looking at the existing, or part of the existing parking space on Madeira Road, and then looking across the back of the existing flats. That's the application site there. And just another photograph of that. This is the existing access into the site. You'll see that you've got what's known as Queen's Court on the right-hand side of this photograph, and then access into the left-hand area is where the existing parking space is. That's another view of Queen's Court. Just to note, there are, as I mentioned, there are similar schemes within the area which do have an additional floor. You can see it in this locality just here. So again, this is looking back across the back of the site itself, and then a view of the rear of the site. And as noted, you've got three stories at present, with access to the first and second floor via external stairways. That's just another view, and that's towards the back of the site where there's an existing substation. And then, as you'll see in a minute, there's some additional parking areas being created to the back of the substation. And that's another view looking back towards Queen's Court. So that's the existing front or existing west and east elevations, and the existing side elevations, and then the existing ground and first floor plans, the second floor plan, and the existing roof plan. So we then come to what are the proposed elevations. As you'll see, the actual proposal is to create an additional, if you like, in effect, third storey, to create 4 storeys in total. The actual height itself represents an additional 2.8 metres to the top of the new roof. As you'll note, it's been kept or kept in from the existing sides of the existing buildings. That's the side views. Just going back to that again, in terms of materials, it is proposed to use render infill at the top level, which mirrors the ground floor level. So there is some replication of proposed materials there. So that's the internal layout. As you'll note, it's an open plan. There's an additional bedroom to it, or there's a single bedroom to each flat, with storeroom areas provided as well. As noted, there's like a terrace area provided externally for each unit. Just to note a little architectural detail at this point, there's a large sort of corner window being formed on the edge of the proposed addition. So in terms of the existing site layout, you'll see in this from this morning, there are a number of existing garage buildings in this location, and just here serving the existing property as well as existing parking space, an additional parking space at this point. This is the proposed site layout. So again, you've got the existing garaging with additional parking space provided alongside them. Then again, this shows the retention of the existing parking spaces, then some additional parking space created in this location here and here, immediately next to the existing substation. In total, there's an additional 8 parking spaces being created, which more than accommodates the requirement for 4 additional units, which is actually 5 parking spaces. Normally you'd expect there to be 1 parking space per unit, and then an additional parking space, giving 5 in total. So it does more than, it actually improves the existing parking arrangements, as well as providing enough parking spaces to meet the requirements. So that's the application, Chairman. Recommendation is to approve the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have public speaking on this particular application. There are 3 sets of public speakers. It is my intention to make a small change to public speaking this evening, and I do this under Part 7 of our public speaking scheme. Part 7 states that it's the responsibility of the Chairman to preside over meetings of the Council so that its business can be carried out effectively and with regard to the rights of councillors and the interests of the community. Therefore, the Chairman of the Planning Committee has authority to use their discretion when applying the public speaking scheme to comply with this duty. I have, during my time as a councillor, for some time had many councillors say to me that they believe councillors should be last to speak, and it is my intention that that will be the case tonight. Section 7 allows me to do that. Therefore, everybody will get exactly the same right to say exactly what they want to say. I just wish to do it in a different order in compliance with requests I've received from many councillors in the past. So can I ask the first speaker? We have a member of the public speaking against the application, Pat Blackman, on behalf of lessees of leasees, my apologies, of Maplin Court. Mr. Blackman. Thank you, Mr. Blackman. If you'd like to get comfortable, press a little button on the microphone, and then you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Right, my name is Patrick Blackman. I'm a chartered surveyor with a practice in Clacton, and I carry out valuations for tendering council from time to time. I haven't been involved in this application. The reason I'm now talking is because my mother lives on the ground floor. So at the moment there are 17 usable garages on the site. although they are too small to accommodate most modern cars. As a result, the car park itself is often full. The applicants have not created more car space. They've simply rearranged the existing car space. The design creates 4 visitor spaces. Access to 2 of these is cut off by residents parking outside their garages. That's on the alongside the electric substation. 1 further visitor space is at the entrance to the car park, and that makes it difficult for emergency vehicles to pass. The applicants propose to place a row of 12 cars up against the flats about 1 metre away. This is not how the existing arrangement is, despite what was said on the introduction. It's impractical to have the cars 1 metre from the block because there are steps and ramps which are used by the residents to get to their flats. There will be no space for mobility scooters and prams, etc., if the cars park that close. It makes the flats more or less inaccessible. If the row was relocated 2 metres from the block, there's a little bit more room, but then there's difficulties of manoeuvrability of the cars. They would have to exit in forward gear, risking the exhaust fumes entering the flats. As designed, there are only 2.4 metres width between each car space. Recommendations today are for a width of 2.9 metres, and I see that that was required by highways. As a result of these factors, all 4 visitor spaces are in fact lost, and also 1 of the 4 car spaces for the flats. So in practical terms, there are not the spaces that are needed for this development. Reading the lease of each flat, there is 1 garage space and a right to park a car anywhere in the car park.
Ms. Blackman, could I ask you to wind up, please? Thank you.
All right. The lease also grants a right for each car to pass over the roadways. The design would not allow that. The ground floor flats were constructed as shops, and there's a 1 metre high loft. So with the addition of further flats, there will be a height greater than that of Queen's Court or other similar 4-storey blocks. I believe the demand for the new flats will be minimal, and a final sale price is unlikely to cover the cost of the development. So it begs the question, why are the applicants seeking planning permission?
Mr. Blackman, I'm going to have to stop you. I'm sorry,
right.
you're way over. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, the next speaker, can I please ask Mr. Marcus Bennett, the applicant agent stroke representative, that's how you're written here, I hope that's okay, to please take the seat. And once again, sir, if you please press the button for the microphone, and then you... Okay, that will help me no end, thank you. And then you two will have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, councillors, members of the council and members of the public, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in favour of the application. Application was submitted in August 2018 by APS Design Associates on behalf of long-term reversions, and the original scheme for 4 one-bed units and 2 3-bed units has subsequently been amended to the current proposal of 4 one-bed. March 2019, the application was brought back in-house by the applicant, and since then an ongoing dialogue has been undertaken between ourselves, the Planning Department and Case Officer, principally to ensure that the scheme was developed to a resolved stage where any remaining concerns have been dealt with, primarily the parking. Officer's report very succinctly explains and clarifies the scheme from a planning policy and legislation perspective. I don't intend to repeat in depth the appraisal made, though it's worth a brief summary of the salient points. The principle of residential development, there's no objection. design and appearance, no material harm to the character and appearance of the surrounding area. Impact on neighbouring amenities. It's acknowledged that obviously construction work would affect residents. However, it's been agreed as part of the proposed conditions, a construction method statement would be involved with that to mitigate those concerns. Waste management refuse store, again, proposed bin storage considered appropriate. Essex County Council Highways Department is the important one. From a highway and transportation perspective, the impact of the proposal is acceptable to the Highways Authority. With regards to the parking and highways, this has been really sort of the main consideration of what we've done. And the dialogue that's been ongoing with the planning department has principally started at the original or the most recent approval, 1976, hence why some of the parking is as is. I know there's been some queries over some of those parking spaces that back onto the property, but that's what was approved. We've worked very, very closely and diligently with the planning department and with Essex County Council Highways to get to a stage where all parties were happy with the proposal from a planning and legislation perspective. Would say one last point as time is running out and I intend to keep to it. Obviously, the National Planning Policy Framework holds a presumption in favour of sustainable development. The officer's report highlights that the scheme complies with all relevant national and local policies. I would therefore encourage councillors to follow their planning department's recommendation to vote to approve the application. There you go, about 2 seconds over.
Excellently done. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr Bennett. And finally, the ward councillor, Councillor Winfield, you get the dizzy heights of 5 minutes. So as soon as you're ready, I think you've done this before. I think you know what you're doing. So
Good evening.
When you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Going back to our local plan, one of the main items on this is to promote healthier lifestyles and well-being, support improved community health. This is a poster from our own council, and in the middle of it, it's support improved community health, which this does not do. Go back to the planning policy, COM20, dust pollution during construction will seriously impact on residents with heart or lung conditions. COM23, general pollution from cars arriving, leaving, engines running and leaving. The ground floor has kitchens, hall bedrooms with just the front door between the occupants and cars' exhaust fumes filling their homes with dangerous pollutants. COM24, healthcare provision is virtually non-existent in Holland-on-Sea. An impact assessment on elderly, disabled, sick, housebound residents with regard to personal health care assistance daily. For 4 visiting parking places will not provide these residents' needs. There are residents now, as we speak, who need this care. Highways, Kings Avenue has restricted parking. It's a seaside road, so where Maplin Court residents park, my call into this committee was top floor. When purchasing a flat apartment on a top floor, it comes with a higher price. Residents choose the top floor because they want some peace and tranquility to cope with life. Adding this other floor will seriously impact on the existing top floor owners, effectively stealing their chosen lifestyle by stealth. The reason I called this application to this committee, highways, impact, traffic issues, poor layout, density issues, and never impact on the neighbours. I have spoken to a number of estate agents who have said it could possibly devalue the top flats by as much as £20,000 to £25,000. That's why people pay more for a penthouse than top flats, like Queen's Court, with the top floor was a penthouse. The worry and frustration this is causing residents is not very well-being. It's not right that you pick a home to live or retire in, can be completely changed against your will, and all this distress at a time when you should be having a peaceful retirement. The emergency services have trouble getting in and out of them flats. Delivery lorries have trouble getting in and out. The flats opposite have trouble with their visitors parking in Kings Avenue as it is. These residents have had this worry for years, wondering whether they're going to change what they bought. When you've saved up all your life for the home of your choice, it can't be right that someone comes along and will just alter it. It's just morally wrong. I want you to think of the morally side of this on your decision and think about the well-being of the residents, which is in our local plan. We say there was 8 spaces for cars. I take it these flats are for younger people, being 4 floors up, no lift. Well, if it's anything like my son or daughter's flats, they have a lot of visitors overnight. That could be 16 cars in that car park overnight. So I hope you can give this in consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Winfield. Would the officers like to come back to the points raised?
Yes, we certainly note the comments about health and wellbeing, and certainly in terms of the car parking arrangements, clearly the car park has been approved by the Highway Authority, and that's been done in conjunction with officers, so we are satisfied that the layout does work as a proposed parking area. That's probably the only comment I wish to make at the moment.
Thank you. Councillors, observations, comments? Anybody? Councillor Harris?
With regard to the parking, I think the residents, Mr. Blackman, beg your pardon, mentioned that the size of the bays are 2.4 metres. In the report, it's saying that they are 2.9 metres. Can we get clarification that it is the larger size, and also what is the actual legal requirement, please?
Graham, you want to do that one? Just looking at it. Yep, just finding it for you.
Sure, I mean, clearly the Highway Authority have specified that each parking space needs to be 2.9 by 5.5 metres, and therefore that would be expected to have been reflected in the design of the layout. So we would expect that to be the case.
Councillor Harris.
So that is a condition of this application then, that those bays are of that size? It would.
I think that's automatic, isn't it?
I think, Chairman, we can certainly put that on as a specific condition if that's required.
Yep. Yep. Yep, happy with that. Any other comments, observations? Councillor Harris? Sorry, come to you. Can you switch off, Graham?
Sorry?
Sorry.
Councillor Winfield mentioned about the sort of health and welfare of the local residents. With that in mind, I mean, if this application were to go ahead, can I ask how long the build project would actually take, and also where those construction vehicles would actually park? Would they be parking in the main car park, or would they be parked away from it in the proposed new sort of parking area where it would keep those, the disruption there? And finally, if I may as well, while we're talking about construction, would there be any controls on construction time to ensure that the disruption to the residents is kept to a minimum?
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I'll come back to officers in a moment, if I'll take Councillor Alexander's point first.
Well, I must congratulate Councillor Harris. I think he must have read my mind and whipped the carpet from underneath of me.
I love it when that happens.
I have to say that I have concerns about the residents living within the flats, and they're there now, and my concern primarily is around what disruption these people are going to endure, the noise, the level of the noise, because obviously construction is about noise, because that's how we end up with the finished product. Also, as you say, the time constraints, I am concerned about that and when they're going to work. I'm not so much worried about the parking, because most parking issues can be resolved by removal and jiggering about, it can be resolved. But I am concerned about the well-being of the people who live there, and it may not be an issue directly to this application that's before us, but it certainly is an issue as a local elected body that we must always take into consideration in any application, surely, of how our residents are going to feel, and to make it as safe and as secure and as comfortable as possible. Can we have reassurances that that the time scales will be rigidly adhered to, and that how can you stop the noise there? It's not possible. You're going to be working basically 3 floors up, and the sound is going to be horrendous for anyone living around it. And I'm quite concerned by that.
Okay, to add my 2 pence to that, it is a concern. We'll be working at high level. Clearly, lifting equipment will be needed, and it will be needed to place somewhere. That's a concern. Obviously, the noise is an issue, and I think we would need to be very strict with regard to the times of day we can allow construction to take place. And even then, as you rightly point out, it's still going to cause considerable upset. Councillor Alexander.
I'd like to just come back on that, because a not dissimilar took place in an area of London. If I'm not mistaken, debris was done by bucket chutes, and they had to acoustically cover these because of the racket of this stuff tumbling down into was actually driving the people who live there totally mad. They couldn't take the noise. So there are issues, and I don't think once we're given permission for this to go ahead, that's it. That's a full application, and that's then outside of our control. This is the only area in which we as a committee have some control and voice our concerns, and our concerns are for the residents who live there now. If it's correct that they're building this with no particular financial gain, then I don't see the point in going ahead with it. But they know what they're doing. It's nothing to do with us. But I still say that we need to be careful when we allow such things as to how we let the people who live there know what's going on and how we treat them.
Okay, I think I'll try and summarise the points made by both. I think what we're looking for really is an idea of how long the construction period will be and how we can mitigate against noise, upset and time-to-day working. What can we do?
Yes, Chairman, this goes into another number of areas, I think.
I'd like to make it easy for you.
In terms of time, we don't have a length of time on that, so that's something which the developer isn't required to provide at this time. You know, they have, as we know, they're normally given 3 years to commence a development. To actually try and keep them at this stage to a specific time limit, I'd say would be unreasonable to a certain extent. You can't say, oh, you must start and finish within 6 months, for instance. But we certainly don't have information from the developer about the length of time that's being proposed. There is a construction method statement condition being placed on this, and I'll read that out as well, which is condition number 3. Number 3 is proposed. No development should take place, including any groundworks or works of demolition, until a construction method statement has been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. The approved statement should be adhered to throughout the construction period. The statement should provide for the parking of vehicles of site operatives and visitors, loading and unloading of plant and materials, storage of plant and materials used in construction in the development, wheel and underbody washing facilities. I think in addition to that, we would need a working hours condition.
Absolutely.
Which, you know, clearly restricts the time of working, which is not listed here, which I think we certainly would need. In terms of impact on existing residents, I think you're then sort of moving into areas of the health and safety executive as an example, and probably building regs as well. Again, we're probably straying away from the planning side of things here, but I think then there would have to be an agreement between residents and the actual developer as to how and when that work would take place. Okay. It could be, and again, this is my personal opinion, you may need to decant some of the residents out of the building while those works were going on, for instance. We don't know what sort of strengthening might be needed to the existing roof structure, as an example. We don't have those details at present. That comes forward at building regulation stage. So, as I say, to a certain extent, we can't predict exactly how that's going to work.
Okay.
But, well, what we're looking at here tonight is the actual planning merits. We're not looking at the way the actual works will be done. That will come under the building regulations and, as I say, the Health and Safety Executive. There would be a duty of care by the developer to existing residents. They have to do that.
Okay. If I can just extend on there was also some discussion about how we reduce noise. I think the example was given of the tubes that are used for dropping rubbish down. Is there any way that we can apply some kind of condition to request that sounds softening everything we want to have? So is there some way we can do that? Is that within our remit?
Yeah, I think we could certainly expand Condition 3, Chairman, under the construction method statement, so we'd look very carefully at that and add that specific item onto it.
I think my position with this development is it's unusual in the fact that it's effectively putting the top onto existing buildings that are already lived in, so that makes it extremely sensitive, I think, and we need to do absolutely everything we can to mitigate any problems if it's ultimately going to be done. I'm not overly keen on it. Any further comments? Councillor Harris.
I'm deeply concerned about the length of time that potentially this construction could take. I mean, you mentioned 6 months. I know you're not quoting that's an exact figure, but it could be 3 months or 6 months. That could, or even longer. That could leave residents with an unbearable living conditions, and I find that very difficult. And also, as somebody who grew up living in a block of flats when I was a child, I know what it's like to have somebody living above. And if you're, I don't know how long these residents have lived in the top level there, but they've, as already been mentioned, they've bought these flats or rented these flats for a particular reason, and now all of a sudden someone's going to plonk a number of flats on top. So I'm struggling with this. I'm looking at the buildings around where it does have similar flats on top, but I'm also very mindful of the thoughts of the residents that are living in those flats and the conditions that they will live under construction, plus also the fact that the people that are living there didn't expect somebody to come and plonk flats on top of them. So I'm really struggling with this, and I'm mindful to fall on the side of the residents in this and actually vote against this planning permission, this request.
Just need to add something to that.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Sorry? Do you want to go, Hans? Do you want to speak?
Oh, let's see what Graham says.
Okay.
I think the point I make, Jim, clearly this won't be the first or last development of this nature where an additional floor is added to an existing block of flats or other buildings, and it's not the first or last in this district or across the country. And I think simply to refuse on that basis, I'm not sure that would be sustainable if it came to an appeal. That because of potential impact on residents, you cannot do that. I'm just not convinced that would be a sustainable reason. That's what concerns me.
Neither am I, but...
Do you want to? Councillor Alexander.
I thank the officer for that input, but when a little while ago we were looking at an application, we were given an address after bringing up a previous application. We were told that you should take every application on its merit, and we are looking at this application and no others. And the officer who gave us that is sitting in this room right now. We're not looking at what might be or what has been or what will happen in the future. We are looking at where we are now. Imagine you're working on 3 stories up. The machinery that you require to take materials from the bottom to the top, and remember there is no lifts contained within this, and I don't see any evidence of that anyway. There must be some kind of a machine that's outrigged for safety, lifting this kind of gear to the very top. This is an enormous piece of machinery, and the only way you can do that, you can't park in Dovercourt and deliver it in Clacton. You have to be very close to the building to do just that. Health and safety factors and all kinds of things are clocking in. I'm not doubting that, but that you are correct in what you say. But the applications I've seen and the developments I've seen, they ascertain around something of space. They could get to it. What I saw today was a very cramped area with very poor parking. And to make other parking, something would have to be removed or something else would have to be built to facilitate the needs of other parking facility. Imagine a great machine stuck in there. Or are we going to stick it on Madeira Road or something and block the road off for 6 months? It's got to be done within the curtilage of that area. I'm going to follow your direction, Councillor Harrison. I'm going to second your proposal that if you are going for refusal, then I too will second that on the grounds as that insufficient documentation is put before us. We don't know anything about this construction. We don't know how it's going to affect us, times, dates or anything. It just seems to me that it's a shame that we have to take this direction. But I'm prepared to second it on them grounds.
Okay. Councillor Williams.
No, I just wanted to say, Chairman, that I understand where everybody's coming from, and the one thing that I do get concerned about is the health and well-being of residents, and I can understand why this one is being picked of the way it is at the moment. I wouldn't personally want to be in that position myself, but we have to take into consideration what is going to happen next. That is my concern, and I just feel that there is impact there, but I can't see anything else within this, the notes that I have written and what you've already answered to us anyway, or what the officers have actually said. It does concern me that whatever happens, it will come back, but I just wanted to make those few comments, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. My concern here is that I think there's a general feeling that the committee aren't happy. Councillor Fowler, I'll take you before I go on.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it on? Yes?
You're on.
Right. When we were on site this morning, there were at least 2 residents, I believe, that spoke to us, and they both mentioned, I know I'm just backtracking, but it is, again, an observation. They mentioned that we were there at the wrong time of day. Mm-hmm. And that the parking problem exists when everyone comes home from work. And one of the residents that spoke to us this morning mentioned about works vehicles, which I can only go on an assumption the reference to works vehicles is something like a long wheelbase transit type van or similar. I didn't see any, but there may have been any height restrictions to the parking in that area. I don't think there were. But, I mean, long wheelbase transit works vans do take up 2 car spaces in a car park. Yep. And that I can understand why they have problems with the car park in there. Okay. And I do share concerns as well, as colleagues do, for the residents' well-being with the work that would have to be carried out to complete this application, but where we would go next, I have to say I'm not quite sure. Yeah. So, but that's just an observation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler. I think, as I was starting to say, clearly the councillors aren't necessarily happy with the development, and I agree with them. I think there's an awful lot not to like about this. The health and safety implications are quite serious, I agree. I think there are many considerations, but what we must, of course, remember is that we are a planning committee, and we can only refuse an application on planning grounds. And therefore, whilst I agree with everything that's been said, absolutely, what I really need from councillors are reasons that are planning based. Can any councillors please help me with that, or perhaps can officers? Can I just... By all means, Graham.
Hopefully this will help members. I think I did allude earlier to the health and safety executive that we can't stray into areas which are covered by that element, if you like. And as I said, you can construct anything to a certain extent, but at the same time, a developer has to have the best interests of the existing residents at heart. You cannot simply go in and start building without doing that. But that comes under separate legislation to what we deal with, unfortunately. The one area which has been touched on would be whether what the proposed development could be classed as overdevelopment of the site. Okay. And there's been, there's already been reference made to the existing parking areas, and whether they're sufficient to cope with the additional parking areas. That would be a legitimate reason for refusal, but clearly that would be against the officer's recommendation.
Fully understood. So there is a reason for refusal, which I don't think actually is a get-out clause. I actually think it's quite fair to say that it's overdevelopment, particularly with the parking element. So I'll look to the floor to see if any councillor would care to take that further. Councillor Harris.
I'd like to follow the comments by Graham there and propose that this is refused on grounds of overdevelopment.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I'm looking for a seconder. Councillor Alexandra, thank you. Okay, so the motion is that the application be refused on grounds of overdevelopment. So let's go to the vote. Those in favour? And I'll add mine to that, so that is unanimous. Sorry, let me correct that. The vote was not unanimous. Those against? Thank you. One against. Almost unanimous. Thank you very much. Either way, the application is refused. Thank you. I'm going to call an adjournment for 5 minutes, okay?
Are you comfort break?
Yeah.
You call it a comfort.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, item 8, A4 on your agenda. This is application 19-00004, outline, land to the rear of Mill House, High Street, Great Oakley, pages 103 to 122 in your agenda. Alison, I believe that's yours.
Thank you. So this application has been called in by Councillor Bush on the grounds that the appeal was dismissed. It's outside the settlement development boundary. It's in the coastal protection belt. Tendering can demonstrate a 5-year land supply and overdevelopment of the village. It follows a recent refusal, 17/01109 OUT, which was refused under delegated powers on the grounds that the site was outside the settlement development boundary, impact on the open countryside and the coastal protection belt, and lack of an ecological survey. That application was dismissed at appeal in October 2018, but solely on ecological grounds. The inspector didn't agree with any of the other grounds. So it's an application for outline planning permission for 5 4-bedroom dwellings with all matters reserved. This is the application site. So the settlement development boundary curves around here and catches this end of this part just outside the site. So the site is wholly outside the settlement boundary except a very small strip of the access. The conservation area for Great Oakley runs along the front of those properties, includes Mill House here, which is a Grade 2 listed building, and runs around its back garden and then carries on in this direction. So it abuts the conservation area, and again the access is in the conservation area. The inspector at appeal, as I said, accepted the principle for residential development of the site. To quote, it said development would have little negative effect on the openness of the countryside or the qualities of the coastal protection belt. The location was deemed acceptable. With future occupants, the proposed development would not be greatly reliant on the private motor car. Thus, the negative social effects in terms of accessibility of services would be limited. This shows you an aerial image of the site. Since the appeal decision, the site was cleared before this application was submitted. You'll see some recent photos in a minute. This is the listed building, Mill House, at the front of the site. And the application involves the demolition of this garage to gain access down the side. So this area is in the conservation area. This is the same as the previous application. The inspector said the removal of the garage would have little negative effect on the special interest of the listed building or the character and appearance of the adjoining conservation area. So there was no objection in heritage grounds. This is within the site looking back to the listed building, and this will be where the access is. You can see the site's been cleared. And this is looking to the southeast of the site, so the open countryside is beyond in that location. And this is looking to the southwest boundary with the development on the malting site here of 2-storey houses. So the application was dismissed only on ecological grounds in the absence of an ecology survey. Since the appeal, the site has been cleared. An ecological survey has now been provided and assessed by Essex County Council Ecology. They have no objections subject to 2 conditions relating to mitigation and enhancement measures given the risk of a remnant population of great crested newts near an infill pond and the need to keep the vegetation trimmed to prevent it becoming suitable for reptiles. So as I said, all matters are reserved, so this is an indicative layout. Again, at appeal, the inspector said that the backland layout is similar to neighbouring developments, so it would not be out of keeping or set a harmful precedent. So the remaining issue since the appeal decision is only ecology. As I said, the site's been cleared, but we've had an ecological survey that Essex County Council are happy with, subject to the conditions detailed in your report. The application is recommended for approval subject to the completion of the RAMS and open space UU. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have some public speaking, and I'm going to apologise to the member of the public who's speaking because I'm going to struggle to pronounce his name. Anthony O'Riordan, is that correct? Have I got that anywhere near right? Fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you. Please make yourself comfortable, press the little button on the microphone, and you will have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for your time this evening. I'd like to bring to your attention my concerns which may or may not bear relevance to any outcome of the proceedings this evening. I won't go into the details in terms of the fact that this sits without the various boundaries that have been highlighted, because obviously they don't seem to play a role, and although I'm not an expert in any of these matters, I don't see the point in covering old ground. Instead, I'd like to focus on the appeal decision being dismissed based on the ecological grounds. Throughout the summary and various documents submitted, it has been made clear the significance the ecology of the site has played in regard to denying the development originally. Yet the Council has clearly ignored the fact that the very reason an ecology report has found no significant impact or relevance to proceed is simply down to the fact that the applicant removed all habitat prior to the report being conducted. And this fact has been acknowledged by representatives of the Planning Office when I've spoken to them on the telephone. The fact that the site was gained via trespassing through the Mortins Grange development, of which I live, Maple House, which is a central house, and access was granted, access was gained through crossing the pond, which has now been filled in, and a fence was removed to put commercial vehicles on there, or commercial, like diggers and things, to clear the site. And this was reported to the council and to the police by my neighbour as well. I guess my point, I'm a principled man, I'm not an expert in these things. I just feel like we're being hoodwinked a little bit in terms of the fact that this was denied last year based on the ecology, the significance of potential ecology there, and the fact that a report needed to be conducted to look into the significance of any ecology there, of which there are loads. I mean, I've seen deer in them with my son, which I didn't ever believe I'd see there, but I have seen them in there. And yet, when it comes to the point where the ecology report has to be carried out, the company that are charged with making this development have cleared all signs of any ecology and removing any tree that could potentially house nesting birds, of which owls and bats and things are over there in the back there, all around that area, because it's quite sort of rural, as I'm sure you've seen today. And yet, in principle, you've recommended that this could go ahead. It just strikes me of being against my principles. I can't see how we can sit here and allow ourselves to be hoodwinked by a company that has taken on the fact it needs an ecology report, but destroyed all ecology, and then got the report completed, and then submitted it to you to demonstrate that there's no ecology there. It baffles me how we're even having a conversation this evening. I've got no issue with anyone making a living. I haven't really got an issue with the fact there's going to be houses put behind me. It is what it is, and I think the fact that we have to be realistic in this day and age that more and more people need housing. It's just the way in which it has been executed and the means at which they've gone to in order to clear a site prior to an ecology survey. I just don't agree with, and it doesn't sit well with me. And I think I'd close by simply asking this. Oh, sorry. Do you want me to stop there? Or can I close? I don't know how to stop that now. I'm going to stop. I'd close simply with, why have council members and the department seen it fit to object based on the ecology and then condoned the abuse of the recommendations made during the planning submission and subsequent appeal by outlining planning consent report, supporting planning? It's unjust and principally wrong and reeks of underhand tactics, which until this point we may have allowed to undermine our position and your position. And I don't think it's too late to rewind from that and acknowledge that there may have been oversight with these things. And I think it's only human to put your hand up, and people put their hands up and say, do you know what, we may have overlooked that significance.
Thank you. I'm going to stop you there. Thank you very much. Thank you. Can I now call upon the applicant agent stroke representative, Peter Legrees? and I think you've done this before, so I think you know what you're doing.
Right. Evening, Chairman, members. First, just like to point out that something that is not included in the report, I did mention on site visit this morning, but equally it hasn't been referred to this evening either, and it's extremely important to the site. Following the appeal decision, where you see the pond that's marked on there, which doesn't exist, that belongs to someone totally and utterly separate to this application and has been infilled by them. Planning permission has been granted for a 4-bedroom house in that location. So if you see where the pond is and then the back garden of the 2 properties there, permission has now been granted by the council since the appeal decision on that site. Therefore, it means that this site is now surrounded on effectively 3 sides by houses, or will be by houses. Just a point that needs to be raised in terms of the last speaker. Access to the site to clear it was granted by the neighbour. We sought that, was obtained, and they removed a fence panel, so that was achieved without any unauthorised trespass or otherwise. Equally, it's quite appropriate for a landowner to clear his land, or her land in this case. The land was overgrown. It's merely long grass, a few trees, a few shrubs, but in terms of your garden or anybody else's garden, it's quite legitimate to remove and to clear that land. That's all that's been done in this case. During that clearance, there were no signs of any protected species. The local residents did make reference to a number of organisations who visited the site, and at no stage whatsoever were any protected species found on the site. So the clearance was legitimate, totally entitled as any landowner to do that. During the consideration of this latest planning application, the planning officer asked for an ecology report. We have provided that, and you see the results of that this evening. I think what's important for members to consider is the appeal decision, clearly. There's only the one issue, which is ecology. It's not for me to tell members what the circumstances are if you don't follow an inspector's decision. That's really for your officers, and I'm sure that they will explain that. But all you have before you is whether or not this site contains any ecology, and whether that ecology is of such a nature that would prevent this development from continuing. If I just leave that with members and say thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and finally, the ward member, Councillor Bush, is not able to attend. Councillor Carlo Guglielmi will be speaking on his behalf, and I think you may have done this before as well. You have 5 minutes. You get the dizzy heights of 5.
I'm very obliged for that, Chairman. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, I too am very disappointed that this application has been recommended for approval, contrary to what was very strong reason for refusal from the inspector. Mr. Chairman and members, I'm speaking this evening, as you said, on behalf of Councillor Bush, who is at the moment on leave. My involvement in this application is because I was contacted by a neighbour who was a previous chairman of Louth Parish Council, with whom I worked for several years. So it was very fitting for me to substitute Councillor Bush. The committee report is heavily biased on the fact that the site had been completely cleared of trees, shrubs, bushes, even a pond next door had been filled in. The whole of the ecological evidence being one of the two strong reasons for refusal, the planning appeal inspector dismissed the appeal, has now gone forever. We shall never know, will we? The action of completely clearing the site following the inspector's comments was very clever and forward-thinking. You take away the reason for dismissing the appeal and suddenly all is good to go. Likewise, quite clever not to provide an ecology report right from the offset. That way no one would have been under wiser. I put it to you that this is not so clever, not forward-thinking. I put it to you that this is a reckless action, totally and utterly unacceptable. It shows no scruples for the natural habitat and a blatant breach of not only EU regulations, but our very own UK regulation for the protected and priority species. You can't tell me that you've got to clear your back garden, as has been alleged a couple of minutes ago, just because it was overgrown. The ecology report was not provided with the original application. That's a major point to be considered. Grey crested newts have been identified in close proximity of the site, but who knows? They might have well been within the site, but we will never know again, will we? I always believed that biodiversity and geodiversity were very big issues to fully consider when determining planning application, but in this case has not been as strong. What you have to ask yourself is why Essex County Council Ecology has requested biodiversity enhancement to be provided for foraging by species such as dunnocks, harsh sparrows, song thrush, common toads and finding the hedgehogs, as is in your report. Because there is evidence that they populated the site before its clearance. If you approve this application, you will be sending a message out there. This is a very good solution to any sites in our district which might be sensitive to biodiversity and geodiversity issues to deal with. The reasons Councillor Bush gave when he asked for this application to be determined by committee whether the site was within the coastal protection belt. The response was, well, it's only slightly in. Well, is it in or is it out? I think it's in. That this would be an overdevelopment of a village deemed for as a smaller rural settlement. Well, there are dozens of buses going in and out of Oakley's. Have you ever tried to catch one? Great Oakley is defined as a smaller rural settlement due to its size and limited range of local services. But the committee report tells you that it's a sustainable village. You went there this morning, so you'll have seen the size and the extent of what is on offer. I'm sure you will draw your own conclusion. But most importantly, this site is outside the development boundary of the existing and the emerging local plan 2017. If you need a reason to refuse, this is it. I'm informed by Councillor Bush that a similar planning application in Oakley, 17-00835 outline, was refused by the council on the grounds that land is outside the development boundary. So can we try to be consistent with our determinations? The council is currently fighting an appeal as I speak, where I spend the whole day today, arguing that the site in question is indeed outside the village boundary. Please do refuse this application for the same reasons. Thank you, members and chairman.
Thank you, councillor. I'll try to be guarded in my comment. Let me say that from the chair, I think it's extremely disappointing that the site was cleared prior to the ecology report. I think that's extremely disappointing, and I'll leave that there. Would officers care to make any further comment?
Just to come back on the appeal decision, so this was 3rd of October 2018, so it's a very current appeal decision. Nothing's materially changed in that area in terms of the sustainability of the settlement. So the remaining issue is ecology. The inspector states at paragraph 29, in conclusion, the proposed development would have uncertain effects on protected species and would therefore conflict with our policies EN6 and EN6A. So when we're looking at ecological impacts, we have to be certain of what the impact is and what species would be affected. Otherwise, you would refuse development. In this case, there was no certainty, so as a precautionary approach, permission was refused by the inspector. Now the site has unfortunately been cleared, which is disappointing, but there is no evidence. Again, there is certainty now that there isn't anything on the site. There's been an ecological survey to prove that, and we've had that independently assessed by Essex County ecologists, and they haven't raised an objection. So it's unfortunate the timing of the site clearance, but in my opinion, there are no grounds to refuse it on ecological grounds. Thank you.
Thank you. OK, I'll pass over to councillors' comments and observations. I suspect there may be a few. Councillor Harris.
Can I ask the officer to go back to the slides where we had a vision of I think that was the one where it shows all the foliage, etc. there. Okay. Let me get his name here. Sorry. The agent for the applicant made a comment that it was overgrown with a few trees. I mean, that looks like it's almost covered. That's probably 80% of foliage covering that site there. So I would have said that far more than a few trees, and it was overgrown. But, personally, having seen that, and it looks like the ecology report was done in July. The officer could confirm that, but for them to clear the site before the ecology report was done, quite frankly, offends me, and absolutely, I think, is an outrage that has been done. I really do, feel that it sends a message that is the way to behave, and I don't think that is the way to behave, and I think that this committee should take that action very, very seriously.
Councillor Alexander. Councillor Alexander. Oh, sorry. You're on.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the map as we're looking at it now and the area designated, it's obvious what those darkened blobs are. Were there any TPOs at that time set against any of the trees on that land, please?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I wasn't...
Wakey. Right. Looking at that map and the darkened blobs, we know what those are, they're trees. Were there any TPOs on that piece of land at the time that the inspector dismissed this?
There weren't TPOs, no. At paragraph 7 of the appeal decision, the inspector says the appeal site is overgrown and was covered in nettles and ivy at the time of my site visit. There are a number of semi-mature trees within the site and dense boundary vegetation in terms of hedging and trees. A pond marked on the indicative site layout plan just to the south of the appeal site was not evident on my visit and appears to have been infilled with rubble. So that was at the time of the appeal site visit. And just to come back on the other point, so the ecological survey was carried out on the 21st of June and the report stated the 3rd of July.
Yep, please do.
The trees that the inspector saw, which he cited in his actual report, were there any, to your knowledge, that were worthy of TPOs that have been removed?
There's no reference to that in the appeal decision, so I would assume there weren't, because it would have been addressed by us as an objection as well if we hadn't had a tree survey and we were concerned. It's something that we would have picked up in the original refusal.
Councillor McWilliams.
Thank you, Chairman. I just would like to query with you paragraph 6.49, page 117. It's about the ecology report, and I'm just wondering where that does actually fit in with what we're discussing tonight. Halfway through there, it refers to the report considers that there is therefore a risk of a remnant population of great crested newts remaining in the immediate vicinity of an infilled pond on adjacent land. It goes on further to say, and if any great crested newts are discovered, work should stop immediately. Is that relating to the fact that this is obviously when it was cleared, the land was cleared? That they've mentioning this?
So the ecologists will have looked at the habitat on the site and in the immediate vicinity of the site, and my interpretation of that is that they think before that pond was infilled it could have been somewhere where great crested newts would breed. So if it's been infilled, that may be that they only breed in the water and then they live in the land around, so they may have lived in the site. So that's why they've got a precautionary approach there in their recommendations, that obviously if any are discovered, work will have to stop immediately.
So that would still... Sorry, Chairman.
Carry on.
So that would still apply? That would still apply if they were approved?
That would, so that forms part of the recommendations that we retain in securing by condition. It's part of the recommendations of the ecology survey.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further comments?
Can I come back?
Of course you can. Councillor Alexander.
Right, so back to the trees and the vegetation. Am I right in saying that the recommendation is that that you are recommended to keep land regularly checked, possibly trimmed down to the ground, etc., thus avoiding any, if you're looking at it as a development site, that there will not be any little creatures moving about. We've established that trees were not an issue here, that they were young and they were maybe in the future going to have been TPO'd because of their value, but not at that very moment in time. The moment of the dismissal, it was overgrown with a pond next door. I've got grave concerns and doubts. I didn't in the beginning, but now I do have grave concerns and doubts. To say that there were no creatures moving about on that land, if you went in there with a very large bushwhacker, I think most creatures would have turned tail and done a bolt for it. They wouldn't have stopped and said, look, I'm here, please identify myself. So I think the ideology of that goes out the window. The second point is that I need to bring up another issue that's bothering me greatly, is the actual access. The access is not as straight as what it looks. There is a slight curvature in it. If these are approximately 20 bedrooms, that could mean as many as 3 to 4 people in the house at any one time, maybe even more with 2 families domiciling the same house. Therefore, the amount of cars that will be there, are we sure that that access to that is very narrow, 4.8 in one place, and an emergency appliance will be able to get up and down there? I got a rather snide remark thrown against me while most people can see the blue lights coming. That's not relevant, and I think that was an idiotic thing to tell me. The fact is that if you're going down there as a young man, for example, or young lady in a car, and an appliance pulls in there and you meet head to nose, that could cause all kinds of problems. There's no passing places, and there's just room for an appliance to get down at the lowest point. Could you just...
Yep, fine.
Again, the access is unchanged from the appeal proposal when it wasn't raised as an objection. We didn't raise it as a reason for refusal in the outline, and the inspector didn't raise it as a concern. There's no objection from the Highway Authority.
Okay. Sorry, can I come back? Yes, of course.
Well, I'm raising it as a problem now, because it's like everything else. It looks good on paper, but in practice, it might not be quite as good. I spoke to a fireman this afternoon who said, oh no, not another one of these. They live in fear of them. I don't think most people realise when the size of a large fire engine bombing down. One of the other issues that was given, well, you know, the chances of there being a fire is very remote. But there again, the chances of the Titanic sinking was equally as remote, but it did. And fires do happen. So I'm concerned about various ways that this application has been put together. And I'm very concerned about that access road. That is bothering me immensely.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Sticking with the theme of the access road, just to the right, or just above where that new application or proposed area is there for the housing, there's a field. Can you please, I know we're talking about any possible application for that field today, but could we, oh, it's gone. Oh, that's back in. Right. Okay. Could we confirm that should a future proposal come in for that field at some time in the future, can we confirm that the access road would not be able to be used, so that you wouldn't be able to spur off of that and go into that other field as well, because of the dimensions would then be not correct?
Yep. I think we can.
I think it's normally 5.5 metre width that you require for that many dwellings. You've got 5 here, which is quite a standard approach, 5 off a private drive. So as soon as you're serving more properties are serving it, obviously highways want a wider access because you've got more conflict of people passing and larger vehicles.
Yep, carry on. Yep.
That was my point. So it wouldn't be, unless they demolish one of the houses there, they wouldn't be able to use that road.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely that you would be able to have significantly more units than this. It would be up to highway standards, but the width of the access is not enough to definitely to sustain this to be developed as well, with sort of 6 or 7 extra properties.
Okay. Yep. Any further comments, observations, anybody? Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if I could just ask the officer to confirm the listed building is Grade 2 or Grade 2 star? Thank you, Alison.
Grade 2, Mill House here.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harris?
The thing that would concern me if I lived in one of those houses adjoining this proposed area is the overlooking of those houses into the back gardens here and into the houses. At this stage, if this proposal was to be approved, are there any conditions that we could put on this application to say that it would restrict those houses to single storey?
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Harris. I'd absolutely support that question. I think that would reduce the harm significantly. Is that something we can do?
So that wasn't raised in the appeal decision. There's no reference to heights being considered or ruled out as unacceptable. As I said, this is indicative. Obviously, you've got issues with neighbours in this location which are 2-storey, and I think almost everything along here is 2-storey. If not, some of these are maybe 2.5 along this side road, I think. But we would assess it if reserved matters came in and we had overlooking concerns. We'd refuse on those grounds or seek amendments, but we would expect them to comply with the Essex Design Guide standards, where you'd have 25-metre back-to-back distances, which they would be able to comply with. You know, these properties have got long gardens, no windows on these side elevations to look to these properties. You've got enough separation in terms of overshadowing. So I think in principle you could build 2-storey on there without an issue, but it would be subject to them drawing up the detail. But then we could refuse the detail if it was harmful.
Understand the principle. I think I'd like to ask if we could, if this is approved outlined here, I'd like to ask that it comes back for detail to the planning committee, and that we possibly make it clear to the developer that if it's past an outline, that we'd like to see single storey. I don't see any reason why we can't do that. At the very least, that's assuming we approve. Any further comments? Councillor Harris?
Just picking up on a point from Councillor Guglielmi regarding the development being outside of the boundary. If we consider that to be inappropriate, is that reasons to refuse this permission?
So the settlement boundary hasn't changed at all since the appeal decision, where the inspector deemed it to be sustainable. We don't have a 5-year supply, so we have to go through the 3 standards of sustainability, and the inspector was very clear that the site was socially sustainable, that it had enough, decent enough level of services that they wouldn't be reliant on the private car. So we would be going against the appeal decision if we raised issues of it being an unsustainable location.
One of my biggest bugbears, of course, we did take all the trouble to draw nice red lines all over our local plan. It's a pity that we can't uphold them, isn't it, really? Thought we were making the local plan. Okay, I mean, I think now back to councillors. Any further comments, or would anybody like to make a suggestion where we go? It's all very quiet.
I've got a feeling everybody wants to refuse it, but we'd need to know more reasons why.
My feeling from the floor is that there's that people would like to refuse this, and once again we find ourselves in a position, if that's the case, that we would need reasons to do so. Anybody like to help us with that? Yes, of course you can.
I don't think that's altogether fair. I'm quite happy to go along with what the rest of the committee agrees on this.
Okay.
So a matter of refusal or approval I don't think is right with us at this very second in time. I'm mainly concerned is that now this has been to appeal, they have cleared the site, whether we like the way it's done or not, and the site has been cleared and all the beasties have not been identified. My concern is filling that pond. Problem is we don't know, is it a man-made pond or is it a lay pond which has been set down for eons and therefore a part of historic nature of our community. So we don't know this kind of thing, so we're pretty much stabbing around here in the dark to make a decision. But my decision, Chair, is quite simple, is that given, and I'm asking the officers this if I may, given the refusal, now that this has been cleared and you have gone with an approval on this, if this went before an appeal, for example, how do you think the inspectors would see this? Would they then say, well, you've matched what we wanted in the original refusal, now we're going to approve it? Would that be the case?
Thank you.
Yes, as I say, the remaining issue is ecology, that there wasn't certainty of what was inhabiting the site at that time. Now there is certainty. We've had an ecological survey by a qualified company, and we've had Essex County Council independently assess it and say that it's acceptable to them. So for us now to raise an ecological ground, I'd be very surprised if the inspector went against those two specialists in the report. Now we have certainty of what's on the site, so there isn't those grounds to refuse.
Okay. And so as I see it then, we find ourselves with an application that the principle for development has been created by the appeal decision, although it was refused, and the one issue it was refused on, the ecology issue, has been mitigated by the clearing of the land, which leaves us with something of an issue, doesn't it? So where do we go from there? Councillor Alexander.
Well, I'm quite appalled that we're in this position and we've been forced into this position because I can see no grounds for refusal, really. And therefore, I will have to go along with approval, based upon the fact is that there's nothing there. You can't do an ecology report when there's no ecology. If it's been removed, the basis of which creatures live has been removed, and there's no creatures. That's obvious. You don't find them on a well-honed lawn, and that's what we saw today. I don't think we're in any position other than to say, well, we should go along with your decision and to back you on this. But I am disappointed that we've reached this point, that we feel blackmailed into agreeing this. I don't like the way this has been done. Once again, I feel rather, hurt by this.
I absolutely agree with that statement, Councillor Alexander, and echo it 100%. Councillor Harris.
I agree with everything Councillor Alexander has said there. But I come back to my point regarding the if this is to be approved, can we stipulate that the housing development is single storey to prevent the sort of harm that is going to do to the other residents that are going to be there, and can we call this back in to look at the detail of that?
Yes, we certainly put a note on that any reserved matters had come back to committee, and if members, if you could clarify if you wanted to impose a condition that it's single storey, or if it's only these plots that are immediately adjacent to these neighbours that you would have a concern, then we could specify, but it's for members to decide what you think would be acceptable.
I think that's certainly reasonable. If we are to approve, we should do that. We should certainly call it back. As to exactly what we do with it when it comes back, it will depend greatly on what comes back. So, yeah, I absolutely go along with that as well. Looking to the floor to move forward. Anybody? Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chairman. I do agree with colleagues. I think it is disappointing what has happened with regard to the clearance. And it's also something that's bothering me about the access to the site, knowing that area as I do. But we are, I believe, we are faced with the only choice is to approve with conditions, which I know is a difficult thing to do. However, I am quite happy at the moment to propose that we approve the application. with the conditions as set out by the officers, and also the condition that the reserved matters return to committee for determination. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler. Councillor Williams.
I'd like to second Councillor Fowler.
Okay, thank you. I have a proposal for approval and a seconder. I think it sticks in many throats because of the way this one's come to us. However, that is the proposal and the second. Councillor Harris.
Can I just clarify that when it comes back, are we recommending that this is single storey, certainly for those two to the immediately that are next to those other houses that are there?
I don't think we can recommend, can we? But we can state that that's what we'd be looking for. Okay. Is that the case?
I can add an informative about the scale. So not a binding condition, but an informative.
Yeah. So I think a sensible developer who realised that was what we were looking for would understand that that's what we're looking for. Okay, I have a proposer to approve and a seconder, and rather reluctantly, but nonetheless necessarily, I shall put that to the vote. So those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, thank you. That application is approved. Okay, moving on. Item 9. A5 plan application 19000398, 14A Waddesdon Road, Harwich, and I believe this is yours, Graham. So, all yours.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a application submitted by Tendering District Council, which is why it's before you this evening. It's what's known as a prior approval application, which isn't a full application. Really, it's concerning it comes under the current sort of permitted development regime, if you like. It's for the change of use of what is now a redundant cash office, which was in Class A2 office use, to an accessible two-bedroom bungalow at 14A Waddesdon Road, Dovercourt. So again, you'll have seen it this morning. This is the site itself. Just to point out one or two features on the site, there is an existing planter area in this location, which one or two members did raise this morning with me, where the proposed parking is going to go. You'll be aware as well there's an existing block of residential flats immediately behind the site as well, with front doors and windows running along the back of the site in this location. I did speak with the assets team earlier this afternoon, and they did confirm that there isn't any other available parking for this particular site. Therefore, parking will have to go within the site somewhere, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So this is the site itself. As you'll have noted, it's mainly residential in nature in this locality. So certainly in terms of the principle of converting to a residential dwelling, there's no objection to that. So this is the start of the site. So that's the area existing planting I was referring to earlier, which is to be removed to provide the parking spaces. And that again is simply further back into the site. So you have a large area of what was obviously the former car park for the cash office. That will now become the main garden area. You'll notice there is an existing planter running along that boundary next to the adjoining flats in that location. So that's looking back towards the existing building. There will be some fenestration changes being proposed, but again, as you'll see in a minute, they're considered acceptable. So that's just looking from behind the building, looking back down the highway. So that's the existing layout. As you can see, it's an open plan office at present with more office-style windows at the moment. That's the proposed layout. So you have a pair of double doors opening out onto the garden area itself. Here's the main entrance into the site, and there will be a ramped access leading from the proposed car parking area into the main bungalow itself. As you'll note, it's fairly open plan in nature, but there are 2 bedrooms being proposed. You'll also note there's a couple of windows being inserted to the rear to provide additional light. So that's the proposed elevational details. Not huge changes. As I said, it now has a more domestic appearance, if you like, rather than that of an office. So that's the proposed site layout. As noted, this is the proposed car parking area. It is to be used as as an accessible disabled bungalow. As a result, there's a disabled parking space proposed in this location with an additional visitor parking space proposed here. There is a larger planting area being proposed in that part of the site, which does mitigate for the loss of the plant area there. There's also some additional planting being shown in this location, although I suspect that needs to be slightly larger in size. And as mentioned, there's a ramp, which there's a private path leading alongside the garden, up a ramp into the main dwelling itself. So that's what's being proposed here. And one of the other issues which members again raised this morning was there's a proposed opaque, if you like, fence being proposed along the top of the existing planter. Now that, I have to say, and I fully agree with members on this, it does, I think, potentially impact or adversely impact on the front doors and windows of the adjoining flats. Now the assets management team take that on board. What they're going to do is give it further consideration and liaise with the adjoining residents to get an update on that. But what we can do to move this application forward is to place a condition on the permission that prior to any conversion taking place, that full boundary treatment is submitted to the council for approval. So on that basis, Chairman, the recommendation is to approve. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no public speakers on this one, so we'll go straight to the floor. Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Chairman. Since this morning, I've given quite a bit of thought to this, and I think this is one of these rare occasions when the need of human beings outstretch the need of flora and fauna. The removal of that, which I was not that happy with, is there were some beautifully developed plants and shrubs growing in there. But you're looking at a disabled accommodation, which is desperately needed in this country. Yep. It really is. And I think that given what we saw this morning with and taken on board about those dreadful opaque things, which I did not like one bit, I think I'm very much in favour of the idea of its removal now, making a space for disabled parking. The whole point of being disabled is that you don't have the ability or mobility to move about if you have to park some considerably way down the road. And I wonder if you could bring the foil back up, which shows, you were talking about penetration. Go back, please. Penetration. There, you can see the... one moment. Sorry, go on. That one. Can you see the dust cart sitting there? Mm. Well, that is where the other car park is, and that just clinched it for me, because they would have to leave there and drive around to pick up the person or persons in that, or they may even be disabled themselves in a wheelchair. Now, I think in this case the council has got it right, and what you're proposing is right, with the exception of those dreadful opaque things. But so long as we have clarification that this will be looked in, because I looked at the way that this is structured, and the actual front doors and windows of some of these flats will be looking out into them, and basically they'd be looking into nothing. It would just be this diffused blur, and I don't think that's very nice for anyone to live there. So with that, I'm prepared at the time to go for approval as laid out, with that condition that you have mentioned.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. I will actually second that from the Chair. Councillor Harris. Morris, you're on.
Oh, I apologise.
Okay. Yeah, the adaptation of this building to a flat for a disabled person, I think is the correct one. I think I would be fully supportive of that. But it is, you can just about see it from that picture there on the right, but it does continue all the way along to the actual building, where you see the front doors are actually set down in a, and it's like a tunnel. Now, if you put a 1.8 metre opaque fence in along there, it will literally become a tunnel. It will restrict light. I didn't see any lighting along there as well. And it really will make it quite horrible for those residents there. So those residents that live along there are my concern at this moment in time. But I would happy to go along with approval on this if that can come back or we can be sure that that is actually going to be dealt with satisfactorily.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I think the suggestion from Graham was that that would be the case. So if that is the case, are there any further comments, or shall we get this one voted? Anybody else? Okay, we have a motion for approval subject... Sorry, yes? Are you coming in? Oh, sorry, scratching.
No, yes. Anyone's moved it yet.
Okay, I believe you did move it. Is that correct?
Sorry, yes.
Yes, you did move for approval. Yeah, which I seconded.
Okay.
So we have a proposal, moved proposal for approval. It is seconded, subject to the information given to us by Graham and the condition there. Those in favour? I add mine to that. That's unanimous. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That completes our business for the evening. Thank you all for coming along. Have a brilliant night.